And hopefully we did that right. It says we are recording. Yep. So with that, if we could do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good. And Kathy Benson, if you would please with the invocation.
Would you pray with me, please? Dear Lord, as we begin this meeting, we ask that you would guide our thoughts and our actions so that we may be successful today. Help us to accomplish our goals while displaying our character. We pray these things in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
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 Thank you, Kathy. Visiting Rotarians and guests. I apologize if I'm missing anyone. Paulette, I see you here. And
I am.
Am I missing anybody else, guests? Very good. Anna, still good to see you with us. Announcements. So the results of the online survey are still coming in. We've only had about 30% returned. At this point, it's very close, but the results are hedging toward not returning until people are more comfortable with the current situation. So if you haven't returned your survey, please do so. If you know somebody who hasn't or you're not sure, make sure that we go ahead and do that. Very important, next week, our presenter is the Rotary 7090 District Governor, Frank Adamson. This will be a great way for you to learn about his plans and goals for the clubs this year. Please be aware that you will receive a link for the Zoom meeting from Joni. Might look a little different because it's originating from the district office, not directly from our club. Also, board members are asked to stay on the line following next week's regular meeting for a brief meeting with the district governor. Okay. With that, are there any other announcements from committee chairs or members?
I have a short one.
Sherry?
Take a look at Anna. This is the last time you're going to see her. We hope she gets out of here. Bless her heart. They've had quite a few changes to her flights, but she's scheduled to leave Buffalo at 8 a.m. on Friday. So we're going to be leaving bright and early for the airport. But we've had a great year with her, and I think she's had a great year with us. So hopefully she'll be back to join us soon.
God bless you, Anna.
Thank you.
This is Diana. This is Diana. I just make an announcement. We have another Rotary literacy meeting this Thursday at noon. So I hope everyone can join us. And Kevin, when it's appropriate, I had sent Joni a couple questions about the survey. So I don't know if you're going to provide a little time.
Say it one more time.
That wasn't on my agenda. I know that we have a board meeting, not this Friday, but next Friday, the 21st. I would assume Joni will respond to you with any of your questions between then.
Okay.
Okay. Any other announcements? Okay. Ruth Lundeen is going to be doing this week's Rotarily Yours. We thank you for that. And
Bravo!
I think we're still looking for volunteers as we go along. Different voices, different takes. And Sue assures us it's not too hard to do. You just need to be here.
And I assure you, I want to thank every Rotarian for stepping up to the plate. And we're going to see new faces and new ways of doing our Rotarily Yours. It's not hard.
Is it easy enough for Mike Roberts?
Absolutely. Gotcha.
All right. Very good.
Sorry, I went to mute there. Okay, I hear you.
So if there are no other announcements, I'd like to make some time for Happy Bucks. Are there any Happy Bucks today?
You can.
Sure, somebody's happy
Well,
about that.
I can do one. When I saw my surgeon in Buffalo, he said that everything looks to be healing nicely. My hard cast is off, so I'm a lot more comfortable now. And he said, as Susan mentioned earlier, that in another now 6 weeks, I will be able to start to move my leg all by myself, and then probably start some physical therapy. So that's better than saying it looks like shit. So I'm a happy camper.
And I'll pay a happy buck because on Friday we get our first shower.
Yeah.
Yay.
All right, anyone else?
I have one, Kevin. I get to take my grandson to the University of to Rochester Institute of Technology on Thursday, where he starts as a freshman, having lived in Las Vegas for the last few years, where he attended the Las Vegas Academy of Performing Arts. He's a photographer. So
Fantastic.
it was great to see him. I missed my conference in March in Vegas, so I didn't get a chance to visit with him then. But he's been here for 2 weeks and quarantined, and we got to take him tubing yesterday. And I guess I was volunteered to move him into his dorm on Thursday.
Congratulations, Mike.
It was great to see him.
I'll add a half buck. I think I missed a meeting or so since Nance and I got back from Chicago visiting our grandkids out there. 6-year-old twins, Jake and Mary, and 13-year-old Grace. But 6-year-olds are much more creative than most of us, I think. And Jake explained to me how to drink a glass of water through a mask. And I just want to let you know, it doesn't work.
We were waiting for a demonstration.
Yes.
You missed it. That's worth it.
All right. Last call for happy bucks. Okay. With that, then we are moving on to our program, and Vince Horgan will introduce our speaker, who's a major stranger to our club.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, we all know Andrew Goodell extremely well, but because I have to introduce him, I did find some interesting facts. Andy is extremely smart. He graduated magna cum laude from Cornell Law School. He also has a degree in political economics and mathematics from Williams College. Of course, he's an attorney and very well respected and known in our community. He was a founding member of the Chautauqua Leadership Network, and has served in many, many different organizations, from not-for-profits to local government, helping and assisting in so many different areas. Of note, Randy was a ski instructor at Cockaigne Ski Resort, and he's been very involved in the successful reopening. I guess we'll be reopening this winter. But he has a special place in his heart for that wonderful family ski area. He was a highly effective, probably the second best county executive from January 1990 to December 1997. Andy's agenda was to continue to lower taxes and just help our county through some of the challenges that we all know exist. In 2010, he was elected as New York State Assemblyman, where he continues to serve in that role. He is the minority floor leader, where he pretty much calls the shots on the agenda items that come up from the minority standpoint. His voice is extremely well respected, and he's done tremendous work as our legislative assemblyman representing our interests. He's been extremely helpful with Chautauqua Lake. Last year, he helped, together with Senator Barillo, secure about $245,000 in funding for the lake. Andy has been, on a personal note, extremely helpful everything from resolving challenges that we have with our lake groups to helping and assisting in fundraising activities. Andy is everywhere. If there is an organization that needs Andy, he is always there lending his support. In Eagle Scouts, you'll see Andy there. And across our community, Andy not only represents us, but he is involved with us. He is a proud husband, father, grandfather, and friend to all of us, giving countless hours. And it's my pleasure at this point to introduce Assemblyman Andrew Goodell. Round of applause, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Vince. After such a great introduction, I'm afraid that anything I will say will only detract from the introduction. A special thanks as well. Many people don't realize that there are some people in our community that just cannot retire. And thank God that applies to Vince Horrigan. You know, he tried to retire from the Red Cross. We recruited him to be county executive, did a great job, retired as county executive. We recruited him to take on some of the toughest challenges with the Watershed Alliance. And Vince, very thankful for all your community service and your leadership. I thought I would talk for a few minutes about what I see the biggest issues facing the state and share with you my recommendations. And I will make my notes available to Ruth, so if she wants to put in the minutes what I meant to say rather than what I actually said, that would be most grateful. As Vince mentioned, I'm so thankful that I've had the opportunity to represent you and Chautauqua County on the floor of the legislature. And for the last 4 years, I've had the good fortune of having a leadership role. The last 3 years as it's minority leader pro tem, which is actually the floor leader. And that means I review every single bill that comes up to the floor on our floor calendar with the help of some incredible staff and an assistant. We decide which bills are non-controversial and can be voted on right away. We lay aside all the other bills that might have either a policy issue or language issue. With some of the language issues, I have a great bipartisan working relationship with most of my colleagues. And so if it's a bill I support in terms of the concept, but there's a language issue, I'll often recommend language changes. And the last week that we were in session, there were 2 bills, for example, that passed with strong bipartisan support after they tweaked the language. Also, when I lay aside bills, that sometimes helps block the bills, particularly ones that have serious unintended consequences, or bills that have been advanced by the majority, but they're not even enthusiastic about it. And so I'll lay it aside, and it gives a face-saving way for them to let the bill die on the calendar. And there's probably 500 or 600 bills that make it to the calendar that we lay aside that never come off the calendar. And that's fortunate for all of us. In my opinion, the issues that are facing New York State over the next couple of years are going to have tremendous long-term ramifications for us here in Chautauqua County and statewide. And the reason I'm running this year is because I want to use that economic and business background that I have and my leadership position on the floor to help move our state forward, minimize potentially devastating unintended ramifications, and really look for solutions that help us through this crisis. And it's going to be a serious, serious challenge. So I was hesitant just because of the size of the challenge, but I look forward to doing everything I can to help Chautauqua County move forward. To give you an idea of what's happening on the state level, we have the first quarter results in from the state comptroller. Overall, statewide revenues overall down 42.2% compared to first quarter last year, 42.2%. That translates to a $10 billion reduction in revenue. Personal income taxes were down 48%. Sales tax down 25% statewide. Business taxes down 31.8%. So to give you an idea of the depth of the financial issues we're facing. Now, in response to that, what the state has done is they basically frozen almost all discretionary spending that they can do. They've held back on local assistance grants, capital projects, state aid to municipalities, and so far they've held back 5.7 billion, and they're anticipating 8.2 billion overall. Right now, we're estimating about a 20% cut in state aid if that were applied across the board. Now, the governor hasn't implemented any of these cuts formally. Instead, has simply not paid. So it's just held back. They haven't announced any cuts. The governor is hoping for a massive federal bailout. I think it's likely we'll get one this year. The real problem will hit next year because the federal government simply cannot bail out all the states for more than a year. So it's going to be a real challenge. Locally, there's a double whammy for local governments because you're going to see state aid cut probably in a range of 20%. And of course, you're seeing 25 to 30% reduction in sales tax revenues. And to put that in perspective, Chautauqua County's total tax levy was 64.23 million, 64 million. Its sales tax revenue was 45, or 2/3 of the local tax levy. So, as you know, a lot of that sales tax is generated by the summer tourism trade. When you impose travel restrictions on Ohio, it just has a horrific, devastating impact on that tourism trade. So our county government is going to be reeling from a loss of sales tax revenue combined with a loss of sales tax revenue. It's going to be very challenging. I thought it would be helpful for you if I not only complain, but give you some ideas on where I think we should go. My recommendation is that we focus on where can we cut our expenses, where can we bring our expenses in line with national spending. So I would look at reducing our welfare spending and bring it in line with a national average. Bring Medicaid coverage in line with what you get on the private sector, because right now Medicaid coverage is more, which is a tremendous disincentive for anyone who wants to leave Medicaid and take a job. I would reduce funding for graduate medical education. A lot of people don't realize we spend about $2 billion a year supporting medical students. And I would transition that into a forgivable loan program. So if the physicians stay in New York, we write off their loan. If they go to a different state where there's a lower income tax, God bless you, repay the loan. But that's a $2 billion hit. And we need to continually look at making our tax structure more competitive. So you hear all the time that Florida doesn't have any income taxes, but Florida still raises a lot of money. And so they have a number of different taxes. And the challenge is to find a tax that applies in an area where you have the lowest economic reaction to it, if you will. And we're seeing the income tax is not the solution. New York State in 2018 led the nation with $8.2 billion in reduction in adjusted gross income as the high wage earners moved to states with low taxes. So we need to look at our tax structure to find those areas which have the lowest economic impact. Of course, as I mentioned, huge impact on our business sector. Imagine last year, this time, our governor was touting all of his economic development programs, all the tourism development programs, and turn the page 1 year later, and the governor, instead of touting our tourism economic development programs, is saying, you cannot come to New York State if you're from Ohio unless you spend 2 weeks in quarantine, and shutting down massive parts of the economy. I mean, it's just astounding the impact that this virus has had. You know, just 6 months ago, if I walked into a bank with a mask, they'd call the police. Now, if you walk into a bank without a mask, they call the police. I mean, it's really changed the way we look at the world. We still have a number of businesses that are closed indefinitely, such as gyms and sports venues. We've passed legislation that's had huge ramifications in the rental market, banking and utilities, and we're going to have to work our way through this. So these would be my recommendations. Number one, I would recommend that the governor terminate his emergency executive orders in those areas where there's low infection rates and allow local governments to exercise local authority. And no one knows our county better than local governments and our local health department. And the governor would retain the authority to reassert emergency authority if and when he needs it. I would, and have been since March, by the way, right from the very beginning, I've urged the governor, stop doing one size fits all. This is a huge state. If you think about it, Richmond, Virginia is closer to New York City than we are. Can you imagine the governor of New York making recommendations on how they respond to the COVID in Richmond, Virginia? But that's what's happening. So I've continued to push, allow local flexibility, move away from one size fits all, lift unconstitutional restrictions on travel, take a more flexible approach. One of the challenges that we have moving forward is that we're having a number of reactionary policies that are coming in play. And the problem that we have is that most politicians operate with a short-term perspective because they're concerned about what's going to happen in 90 days when the election occurs, rather than what's going to happen in 2 or 3 or 4 years from now. And it's an inherent problem. A lot of our elected officials, while they're very well-intended and very smart in their own fields, often lack economic or business backgrounds. And as a result, they'll have very well-meaning legislation with just horrific unintended consequences. So that's an area where I'm focusing a lot of effort on the floor of the legislature and in committees and behind the scenes, trying to say, no, look at the longer term ramifications. And I'll give you a couple simple examples. On the COVID response legislation, as you know, they imposed a temporary moratorium on the payment of rent. Well, if I were to ask you to develop a statutory framework to create homelessness, I gave that as a challenge, you know, somewhat of a perverse challenge, but I said, go develop a statutory framework for creating homelessness. Here's how you would do it. Number one, you'd make it much more difficult and expensive to rent to those who are on the edge of homelessness. That would be the working poor. And so that's exactly what the state legislature did last year. And they said, you can only charge 1 month security deposit, but we're going to require you to spend 2 to 3 months and a great deal of expense to evict someone. Well, as soon as you make it more difficult to rent to those who are on the edge, the rent goes up and the credit ratings requirements go up and homelessness goes up. The second thing you would do is you'd say to those people, we're going to implement policies to make it impossible for you to rent an apartment. And we'll do that by saying that those of you who have the hardest time making monthly rent payments, we're going to let you go 6 months, accumulate a massive unpaid rent balance. You'll then be evicted. You'll have a huge judgment against you. It'll destroy your credit rating and make you untenable. And then the third thing you'd do is you'd say, to those landlords that rent to the wealthy, God bless you, we love you, but those who rent to those who are at most at risk of homelessness, we're going to put you out of business. And here's what we'll do. We'll eliminate your revenue for 6 months, and then at the end of the 6 months, we'll send you a property tax bill for your school taxes, and another 3 months later, we'll send you a school tax bill, and we'll put you out of business. And so you eliminate the ability of low-income tenants to find an apartment, to rent an apartment, and you eliminate the supply of apartments, and you're going to create massive homelessness. And it's a slow-moving train wreck that will play out over the next 1.5 years. And so what's the solution? The solution is much like the, we had a COVID rental assistance program that Senator Burrell and I both support. And it was tailored. It said, if your income went down, we'll help you to the extent your income went down as it relates to the percentage of your overall rental obligations. That's the type of program that helps tenants and landlords without creating homelessness. They're also seeing reactionary policy on immigration. Of course, you know, President Trump, right or wrong, made immigration a big issue. My Democrat colleagues reacted to that, and they did it by making it giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. And then they made all DMV databases secret. They actually made it a crime for a New York law enforcement official to share any DMV data with, say, an FBI agent. Imagine that. You have a shooting incident going. The guy's driving away in a car. You run the DMV database because you're a New York officer. You know what the driver and the owner looks like, where they live, where they might be heading. And if you share that with the FBI, you, the police officer, would be creating a felony. That's an astounding issue, isn't it? Obviously, there's a middle ground. The middle ground is, look, if you're going to have driver's license, fine. Make it clear that they're not a lawful U.S. resident. And if you want to protect that data, fine, but make the data generally available to law enforcement officers like the FBI. Employee wages. Obviously, there's a strong push to increase wages, but there's a side effect. So when you increase the minimum wage, especially if you clear it above what's called a market clearing rate, for those of you who like to talk about supply-demand curves, what happens is you create unemployment. And that's exactly what happened. None of us have gone into a major store without seeing a substantial increase in self-checkout lines, right? Well, as you increase minimum wage, you increase the cost effectiveness of automation and you result in higher unemployment. Law enforcement. This is an amazing thing that there's been such an incredible backlash against law enforcement. And so you've seen it. Last year it started when they eliminated any bail whatsoever for over 400 different crimes. No bail whatsoever. They had guys that they arrested more than once on the same day in New York City. They had guys they were pulling in routinely. They had one guy they arrested. On his way out, he burglarized a cop car. The crime rate in our major cities in New York is just exploding. And you've been reading the statistics. I mean, we're talking 40, 50% increases in violent crime. They've expanded criminal discovery, including, by the way, the identity of all witnesses to a gang murder or a mob hit. Well, you can imagine what's happened to the level of cooperation we're getting from witnesses. We've gone so far as to say it is illegal for a federal immigration officer to arrest a court spectator who may be coming to watch a friend or something in one of their court proceedings. So now we're arresting New York police officers if they share DMV database, and we'll be arresting federal officers for executing a federal civil arrest to anyone who might be a spectator. This is while they're on the street going to or from. So obviously, oh, and the last thing I should mention, they expanded discovery of police records. And I support the effort to expand discovery of police records for those that are founded complaints. But they went so far as to say publicly available, unfounded, or false complaints. And this resulted in an unprecedented number of police retiring from the service. So again, our challenge is to find a balance, a middle ground, recognizing that there are legitimate problems, but you don't throw the entire system out. So they had too much confidentiality in the past. I understand that. Allow the discovery of founded complaints, just like we do for doctors, lawyers, and accountants, but not unfounded or false complaints. Voting integrity has been a major issue, and there were questions earlier about absentee ballots. They also just recently passed automatic voter registration. And I'm supportive of that type of approach, automatic voter registration. But in the process, they eliminate any of the integrity checks. So if you pick up a voter registration form right now from the Board of Elections, first question, are you a U.S. citizen? And you have to mark yes or no. At the end, it says, if you filled out this form falsely, you're subject to perjury, imprisonment, and a potential fine. All that was eliminated with the automatic voter registration. No question that you actually have to fill out and say on an affirmative basis that you're a US citizen or a New York resident or otherwise eligible to vote. And then they went one step further and they said, if it turns out that you weren't eligible to vote and you voted anyway, that's okay. We'll even count the ballot you cast. We'll remove you so you can't vote in the future, but no criminal sanctions, and we'll count the ballot you cast. Again, my friends, there's a middle ground, and the middle ground is you have automatic voter registration, but you require a few simple questions that you actually affirmatively have to answer for your voter registration to take place. So you've heard some of my recommendations. Expand the COVID rental assistance program to offset income losses. Expand loan assistance based on COVID income losses. Make the DMV database readily available to FBI and other law enforcement individuals who are helping us maintain safety. I didn't mention the scaffold law. I would change that, put it into the workers' compensation, restore judicial discretion in setting bail, and prohibit public disclosure of unfounded claims against the police. Those are a few ideas. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. And if anyone actually wants a copy of this outline, I would be happy to make it available to you. Any questions?
Thank you, Andy. Just remember to unmute yourself if you have questions for Andy. I see you waving.
Yeah, Andy, thank you for this update. Just one other aspect of this rental assistance issue is, you know, as you indicated, you know, homelessness is one piece of that. The other part of that is, you know, if you've got a landlord who is trying to do the best they can, trying to keep their property up, the Department of Development in the city of Jamestown had indicated that they are just so concerned about the amount of turnover in properties. There's a lot of these landlords that say, hey, I've had it. And these were most likely some of the better ones. So then that leaves us subject to, you know, the out of town, out of country individuals coming in, scooping up property. And so all of our, you know, all the efforts that we're trying to help housing as a general rule, just again, I'm only talking Jamestown at this moment, could be reversed, you know, just by that decision. So I appreciate anything you can do.
Randy, I appreciate your comments and you're right on target. And as you know, Randy, I said this is like a slow moving train wreck. It's like a disaster on slow motion, because what will happen is the school taxes will come out and landlords who haven't gotten any income for 6 months won't pay the school tax. And they won't pay the county tax. And they stop doing maintenance. It's not that they don't want to maintain the place. They just don't have the cash flow. And so you'll see the real ramifications hitting in the next year, year and a half, when some of these properties go into a tax foreclosure or mortgage foreclosure, and you're going to see a general decline in the quality of the rental units, particularly those that are designed for the working poor. And so, yeah, it's very frustrating seeing that happen. I'm hopeful that my colleagues, my Democrat colleagues, will recognize it is going to be less expensive to put in a program that helps tenants who have lost income because of COVID make those rental payments and help the landlords than it will be to address the unfolding tax foreclosures and homelessness.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Andy, I'd like to ask you one. Undoubtedly, the middle ground is where the pot of gold is, it seems, but there's hyperpolarization. What sort of appetite do you find among your colleagues for moving away from the extremes toward a more central position? And how can we help move people in that direction? I've often said, whatever side you're on, just remember the people on the other side aren't all idiots.
Yeah, great observation, Walt. And so people don't recognize, if they're watching our proceedings, the incredible amount of bipartisan communication that occurs between me and their floor leaders. I mean, it's just incredible. So when I lay aside a bill, they will ask me, Why did you lay it aside? What's the length of the debate? And what are the issues? Often, their own members will come to me and say, what are the issues? And I'll share the issues with them. And sometimes I'll share not only the questions, but the answer, because the debate is not designed to embarrass them, which is what creates some of that personal animosity. The debate is designed to focus on the merits. And they don't always want to debate, which is why every year there's a half a dozen bills where they'll rewrite the language to address a language issue, right? And so there's an incredible amount of bipartisanship that occurs just below the surface on the floor of the Assembly. And my colleagues do the same, my Republican colleagues. And so you'll see when we start a debate, we ask the sponsor to yield, we ask questions at the end, we always thank them. We try to identify the positive rationale that they're trying to address, and then articulate our concerns with either the approach or the language. And the more you can minimize that personal animosity, Walt, the better you can get at having a discussion where people can actually hear each other over what the issues are and a more moderate approach. The challenge you always have is after every election, you'll have a half dozen newcomers who are just elected, who are there to change the world, who come with the perspective that none of us know anything about anything. And it'll take a session before they start recognizing that there's a great deal of wisdom amongst their own members as well as amongst ours. And the last thing I would say is we always encourage as much as possible that members of the public communicate with us. There's this phenomenon, Walt, where as you drive toward Albany, legislators become more and more expert over subjects they have never considered until we arrive there, having convinced ourselves we're experts, and then we actually vote. And so we push as often as we can to take a slower approach, to avoid midnight votes, to have more hearings and more opportunity, because those who are directly involved in an industry or a business or an issue often have greater insights than we do, and it's wise for us to listen. And those people typically come without that partisanship chip on their shoulder, if you will.
Thank you.
I got a question.
Sure, go ahead, David.
You mentioned like a half a dozen sort of hot button issues and votes that get taken and people with driver's licenses or whatnot. But then you talk about hundreds of bills. And maybe this is just a procedural issue about the legislature, but we got all kinds of laws. We have 10,000 laws probably in this city of Jamestown. So what are all these extra bills about? Can you tell us that?
Yes. And probably about 90 to 95% of the bills pass without any debate or objection, Dave. And they're typically a reflection of the fact that New York State starts from being overregulated in the first place. And so, for example, this year we had a bill that would allow the city of Jamestown to hire a plumbing inspector that lives outside the city. That's very important for the city of Jamestown, although it begs the question, David, why did we restrict it anyway, right? We passed a bill that will allow French Creek and Mina to merge their town courts. Great idea. We should just eliminate the whole bill that required them to have a separate one in the beginning and let everyone do that, right? And so most of the bills are along those lines. There's probably 400 or 500 bills that are tweaking legislation that we're not willing to simply eliminate.
Okay, interesting. Got it.
Sorry to
Andy, I've got a
disillusion you. Go ahead, Ruth. I'll get you these notes.
Sure. But so one of the things that was a very disturbing occurrence that I was reading about was that there are people in public health, like at the county level, in states where individual counties are taking the lead with masks, that have felt personal pressure, including safety issues, and some have even resigned because of the public pressure and pushback. So if you put things on the local level, how will you protect the local administrators?
Right. And so, first of all, I think we're very fortunate here in Chautauqua County. PJ Wendell, who's the county executive right now, has a health background. As you know, he spent over 30 years in the as an EMT, and he has been very, very focused on placing the health and safety of Chautauqua County residents first and foremost. Although I recognize, as you do, that may not be the case in every county. And so what we've done in other areas, like in education and in other areas of health, is you have the state health department give general guidance, but not a one-size-fits-all mandate. Give that general guidance to the counties. The county board of health has substantial authority, particularly on public venues like restaurants or bars or things of that nature. They have tremendous local authority. And Chris Schuyler, I don't think anyone is questioning her bona fides, and I think that's true for most counties across the state. But last, I think most people should be treated with some level of personal respect and responsibility. You've seen that the enforcement of the mask requirement has been initiated by businesses, whether it's Walmart or who finally has come on board, many of the other businesses, and you've seen the signs, they say, you know, no mask, no service. They're doing it for liability reasons, amongst others. And so I think the current system has the level of protection. There'll be problems no matter what you do, but I think the problems in having a flexible approach, recognizing the knowledge and expertise of a local health department and the knowledge and expertise and thoughtfulness of most residents, I think is a better approach than a one-size-fits-all that's designed for New York City and applied to Chautauqua County. Just a simple example. As you know, the state shut down all the schools in Chautauqua County and SUNY Fredonia at a time when we did not have a single active case. Think about the rationale of that. We shut down SUNY Fredonia and send all the kids to New York City. A more flexible, thoughtful approach, I think, while not perfect, is better than a one-size-fits-all.
Thank you.
I can't see your face, Ruth, so maybe you're frowning. I can't tell.
Andy, there's a couple comments in the chat. New York State must ensure timely payment of contracts already executed with the nonprofit sector. And then a second point, consider impact of unpaid utilities on municipal utilities like the BPU. There are some dollars to assist, but not likely enough and not enough staff capacity to follow up.
So both privately by correspondence, I guess it's a little bit public now. I and my colleagues have been urging the state to make timely payments. It is, in my opinion, better for the state to say, look, we're holding back 20%, be right up front about it and make timely payments to the other 80%. Because if you give specific guidance, then our not-for-profits and our agencies can make thoughtful and intelligent adjustments now. The worst case scenario is you hold back money, you don't tell them what you're gonna do, and then you say, oh, and by the way, it's the end of the year, we're cutting your funding 20%, sorry you don't have any time to make any retroactive adjustments, right? So our recommendation has been very direct. Tell how much you're holding back, pay the rest on time. We've also introduced legislation to do that, Kevin. The second issue is that the legislature passed a bill that said that during the COVID, you don't have to pay your utilities on time and the utility cannot terminate your service. I debated against that bill for a couple of reasons. First, all of our utility rates are regulated. That means there's a fixed amount of profit that a utility can take and it's tightly regulated. So they don't have the financial flexibility to simply allow people to continue to run up bills with no likelihood that they'll pay them. And of course, we all know the longer they don't pay, the less likely they'll ever be able to pay. Not because they might not want to, but because of the size of the bill. The second thing is that waiver only applied to those whose impact was impacted by COVID, but there was no finesse. So it didn't say, for example, you have to be low income and the impact on you financially has to affect your ability to pay. It just said if you lost any income because of COVID, you didn't have to pay your utilities. You could be a millionaire who just dropped down into the $900,000 bracket. My heart bleeds for you. You lost 100,000, but don't worry, you don't have to pay your utilities for 6 months, right? Doesn't make sense. The other thing you might want to ask is, if this exception only applies to those whose income dropped as a result of COVID, who has to pay? And the answer is all your senior citizens. They're not eligible for the break. All those on fixed incomes, retirees, right? All your essential workers. And so what this legislation actually said, Kevin, is we're going to raise the utility rates on all of our senior citizens, those on fixed incomes, and all of our essential workers, so that those who may have been able to pay but lost some revenue don't have to pay. And again, I started this discussion by saying, I look at it from a business perspective. It didn't make business sense. You got to look beyond the initial knee-jerk popularity and say, how's this going to play out? And who gets hurt and who doesn't? And is there a better way to do it? And the answer is yes, of course there's a better way to do it. And we have a bad debt and charity pool that we have for hospitals. We can implement something similar using federal funds to back utilities for those who are working poor, who go down even lower and can't make their utilities. There's a solution. It's more complex. It's less capable of being used on a soundbite, but the long-term ramifications are much more positive. And that's what I keep trying to work on behind the scenes, try to encourage that type of thought and that type of discussion.
Thank you, Andy. Sue, if you're talking to us, you're muted.
Sue?
I got it. Here we
There
go.
you got it.
All right. If you were a parent of a high school student or a junior high school student today, would you send your child to school in September?
God, yes.
Really?
I mean, no offense to any of my kids or my wife's kids. So with that question in mind, so you may recall I tried to make it clear the limits on my knowledge and ability. And if I didn't make that clear, you know, let me do that again. So we have school boards that are elected. And their mission is to balance educational needs and safety and all the issues that go into running a school. I was not elected as a school board member. They were. We have school superintendents that make a lot more than I do because they have a lot more expertise than I do. God bless them. That's their role. We have a board of regents in the state education department. Again, there are experts. We should let them use their expertise. And the decision, in my opinion, Sue, on what level of education and in-person versus online should be made by school boards pursuant to guidance from the state education department. And if you're the school board in a school district where there's no active cases or very, very few active cases, then yeah, having in-person schooling always beats online schooling in terms of the quality. If you're on the same token, have a school board where you have an outbreak, by all means, you've got to look at other alternatives. If you look today, Sue, right today, took a snapshot, about half our school districts don't have a single active case within their school district boundaries. And so, you know, again, let's look at the local experts. I support their decisions. And to the extent we can have kids in school safely, it's always going to be having school kids try to learn online. The problem with online learning is your grade students will thrive. They'll do fine anyway. It's the students that are having a challenging time. Those are the kids that get hurt the most on online learning.
I just had this conversation with a teacher from Philadelphia who is he's desperate because he teaches children who need extra help. And they are not going back to school, at least until after the 1st of November. And his kids that he has made great progress with are suffering terribly. And he's tried everything he knows how to try and help them. And he is desperate at this point.
Right, Sue. And as you know, our schools wrestle with all kinds of safety issues all the time, right? I mean,
right. Guns.
Guns, yeah. Other viruses, right?
Yes.
So I recommend, look, I have great confidence in our elected school board members and our superintendents. And I think they are perfectly capable of making those cost benefit evaluations. And they're tough. And I'm thankful I'm not a school board member, but that's where I think the decision should be made.
Great. Thank you.
All right. And with that, we are 6 minutes past the hour. Oh, I got Jim Smith. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. And you were talking about the challenges and the issues with the upcoming election and proper, to avoid fraud. Do you see any progress? Do you see any understanding from other people that their realization of changes that have to be made or the proper changes? I mean, do you see any progress?
Jim, right now, there are too many political overtones, but I'm hopeful that as time moves forward, we'll have a more thoughtful discussion on that. So I mentioned that we had the automatic voter registration legislation that went through. The automatic voter registration that passed the Assembly, by the way, Jim, only applied to those who are seeking financial assistance from the state. So if you apply for welfare benefits, healthcare benefits, or other government benefits, you would automatically be registered to vote. On the other hand, if you were paying your income taxes or your property taxes or seeking a hunting license or a business permit, those folks were not automatically registered to vote. So you starting to get a sense it's more than just let's have as many people registered to vote. There's a concerted political effort to have certain people automatically registered to vote. Now, during the last primary, a lot of the highly respected, more senior members in the Democrat caucus lost their primary. And that's sending shockwaves through my majority colleagues. And I'm hopeful that those shockwaves will translate into let's be careful about how we're moving forward so that we can ensure that those who are being registered to vote are both taxpayers as well as recipients, and that we have appropriate protections in play. Right now, though, it's driven by politics, Jim, more than substance, and hopefully we'll be able to swing back to policy as we move forward.
Thank you, Andy.
Well, everyone, thank you very much for putting up for me. I certainly
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And Andy, thank you. As you know, a donation in your name will be made to the Rotary Foundation Polio Plus program to assist with ending diseases around the world. One last reminder before we wrap up here. Next week, our presenter again is the Rotary District Governor, Frank Adamson. Please try and attend, and board members, please stick around after that meeting for a brief board meeting with the district governor. Again, thanks, Andy. Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.
Well, that was an excellent presentation by Andy.
It sure was. I almost lost it because it